You know the chorus.
Maybe.
You do. We all know the chorus.
This is going to be some like Christian
It's a long
hymn.
intro. No, it's not a hymn at all. I don't know if we're going to make it all the way to the chorus by the time we need to get going on the podcast today. But this is Running on Empty. You'll hear it in a minute. I'll bring it back up when it comes back up. But it has to do with sort of like or at least the chorus, because the verses don't make any sense to me. But it's the experience of unrest.
Yes.
Yeah, you
I
heard
may
that?
have.
Oh man,
You don't understand,
This is classic
Todd.
rock, man.
I lived in a hole.
Jackson Browne, Running on Empty. You've lived in a hole.
I lived in a hole, culturally speaking.
Well,
So in terms of like
welcome
music,
to the daylight.
Yeah, it feels
That's
good.
a classic rock station song, which admittedly is probably devil worship. I don't know.
Clearly.
With the way the lyrics to that song go, the verse, I have no idea what's happening in it.
Well, have you played it backwards yet?
Oh,
That's the trick. That's how you know. It'll tell you. Satan
you're right.
loves you.
Oh my gosh, that's
However,
what Running on Empty backwards is.
That's what I've heard.
I would guess that Running on Empty backwards would be like rest in God's rest or something like that.
No, it's something about Satan.
All right,
clearly.
welcome to Second Look. That was a long intro. We've wasted time.
Oh, that's good.
We're here to talk about what Hunter delivered this past Sunday, which was the beginning part of chapter 12 of Matthew, right?
Yep.
I'm having a hard time remembering because Monday we had a day off and I just completely...
We're out of the loop.
Yeah.
Mentally.
So what did we talk about? What was your sermon?
Jesus?
That's about all I got. Jesus and
Jesus
rest.
as Lord of the Sabbath.
There you go.
Couple controversies where the Pharisees are asking him questions to test him about what he believes about the Sabbath.
Yeah.
So.
And really the idea, like, they're being picky about these rules, and I find it really interesting. The whole framework of rules seems to just be the predominant theme of the Old Testament, and you could almost say that like it's a predominant theme in the general Christian culture. Right?
Yeah,
we're just like committed to keeping rules, and that if we're keeping the rules, we're checking that box, then we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And Jesus really this is not the only time he does it, but he really throws that under the bus.
Yeah.
And it's like, who's in charge here? I am. Like, I'm Lord of the Sabbath, and like, it's meant for your good, not like, quit trying to treat me like dirt here. I just find that to be a really interesting moment for Jesus.
Yeah.
To do the emphasis that he does, to say more than one time in Matthew, I desire mercy, not sacrifice.
Right.
And to try to say like, I'm not interested in you keeping all the rules.
Yeah.
As
There's
much
something
as
bigger here.
Yeah, as much as I am getting to the heart of the matter and really redeeming you and making you a new person. Yeah. That like this external commitment to sort of like keep up with what I said was good. That's not actually real. It's almost like Jesus is aware of the fact that we can pervert even that.
Yes.
We can pervert even good rule keeping.
Right. It's like part of the brokenness of sin is this constant desire for measurability.
Absolutely.
You know? And so, like, in other words, I think we know within ourselves, we feel unjustified in 1,000 different ways. And the one way we can offer some level of comfort to ourselves is by measurability. And Jesus is like, listen, like, the Sabbath doesn't work like that. Like, the Sabbath was made for me, or actually, and for us as believers as well. Like, the Sabbath was made for you, not the other way around. Like, you were not made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is meant to serve you. And in some ways, like, the law is operating like that as well. Whereas, like, you weren't supposed to have this thing all figured out. Like, the law is supposed to serve you in some way, and it's really about this heart. It's supposed to reveal things about the heart. Well, and now it's not pretty what it reveals.
It's
but
there's kind of a relationship between what you just said there and what Martin Luther said. God doesn't need your good works; your neighbor does.
Right.
Like, this isn't about God needing us to all behave
Yes.
a certain way for His benefit. it's actually he's creating these standards, these expectations, and this way of life that is like we believe that everything that the Bible affirms as good and right and perfect is worth identifying and agreeing with and saying, you're right, it is good, it is right, it is perfect. It's the way things should be. The problem that we as humans have is not, well, sometimes we do have problems agreeing with that. People do struggle to be on board with what the Bible says. But if you can get over that hump, it no longer becomes like, can I trust what God says is good? It becomes like how you're using those things in your relationship with God. Is it earning you favor? Is it the means through which you approve of yourself and others? Because all of that to me is like how we get weary and heavy laden as Christians. We get weary and heavy laden by throwing the burden of obligation and expectation on our shoulders and everyone else's shoulders and say, unless you're climbing this ladder at a certain pace or reaching these levels that other, like I can get there quicker than you, so I must be better than you.
Right.
And we create all kinds of class distinction in our churches and in our relationships as Christians, and we're totally violating the principle of I desire mercy, not sacrifice.
Yeah, and nowhere does that like come clear, especially in our passage, than the man with the withered hand. Yeah. Where it's like this guy has a legitimate problem, and comes to Jesus for healing.
On the Sabbath.
On the Sabbath.
When you're supposed to be taking a break.
I just can't, like, it's just...
It's too much work to heal.
Man, it's difficult. It's difficult to, like, have compassion on the Pharisees until you realize that, like, I operate like this in a lot of different ways, And so it's just hard because you see this guy who has an absolutely real need, and the only thing these Pharisees can see is rules. That's it. Like, almost to the dismissal of this guy's real need. And Jesus is like, time out. It's actually lawful to do the good thing. Yeah. That's what it's about.
I grew up a rule-keeping kind of guy.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily saying I always kept the rules, so please understand that. I just generally my personality was not to pursue rebellious activity. It was more like I better stay in the good graces and not do bad things.
You had the fear of God in you.
I did, and it was a fear of God created by my fear of my dad.
Sure.
Like I didn't want to get in trouble, so it was really self-preservation. Is what it boils down to. Like I didn't want to have to face music, but to me, and maybe it's not the same way for other people, but like. Rule keeping is a cleaner cut way of approaching things.
Sure.
And I understand that we gravitate in that direction. And for a rule keeping mind like myself, it really is a challenge to like know what to do with this man Jesus.
Yeah.
When he comes in and says, basically, he gives a stamp of approval for David and his men violating the Sabbath and the bread of the presence that was like to sort of like drop hints like that was cool with me. I didn't have a problem with that. And it's like, Jesus, you created these rules. God the Father created. Like, why are you? And like, all of a sudden, it creates like a question mark of, are these rules negotiable?
Right. You could think, well, that's what the Pharisees thought. That's clearly what they thought.
Yeah, and that's their accusation.
You could definitely draw that conclusion. Jesus is basically like, hey, David broke the law, and he's justified.
Yeah.
Like, he's all right.
Which sounds like a teenager making a really good excuse about something.
We were late, and so that's why I
found a loophole here. I don't think that's what Jesus is doing. I do think there is something he's anchored in this I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Right. And he's anchored in like these rules aren't going to sanctify anybody. Yeah. Though we think that they will. what he's trying to get the Pharisees to, well, they'll never come around.
Right.
But what he's utilizing their stubbornness and their commitment to those rules to help us and the people around Jesus to see that something greater than rule keeping
Yes. Yeah.
is now being put into the equation through Jesus' life and teaching and ultimately his death and resurrection.
Yeah.
And, the week before I preached the "Come to me all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And this is a carryover. After the service, I heard you talking to someone who, you were talking about it was the same message but different angle.
Yeah.
I think we could actually teach this. And if you're teaching the gospel, you kind of do teach this pretty consistently.
Right.
Like the
in
concept of the gospel is the concept of God ushering in a new Sabbath that's not regulated to one day of the week. Now the Sabbath can actually show up all the time because Jesus is our Sabbath.
That's right.
He's the one that we can turn to find rest for our souls, to realize that like the burdensome experiences of life that we often create for ourselves as we look at Scripture and kind of like think about what it is, how do we need to live our life and do right in life, all of those expectation creating conversations that we have ourselves have to find some kind of relief, especially for those people who aren't able to pull it off, right? Like who are finding themselves like stuck over and over again, not able to live up to the expectations that God creates or they create for themselves.
Yeah.
So we've got a gospel experience in the concept of the Sabbath, and Jesus is saying, "I'm the Lord of the Sabbath," which means like we can find something restful in Jesus as we turn to Him.
Yeah. It's good.
Cool.
It's really good.
I thought you did a good job.
It's
It
a
was
good passage, man.
Yeah, it was
just
good to be encouraged and hear it.
Yeah, in one sense, it preaches itself. It's it's easy to see like, man, I'm missing Jesus here on a regular basis if I'm thinking it's all about rules. There's got to be something bigger and better here. And Jesus is like, yeah, it's called me.
One thing that I think we can, you didn't necessarily talk about it, but like we know it's indicative of the Pharisees to have this attitude because it plays out all the way to his crucifixion. But verse 14, like after all of this good news is being proclaimed and after Jesus is really just offering like, man, you can find rest in me, the Pharisees go out and conspire against him about how to destroy him.
So you're not allowed to prepare a meal on the Sabbath.
But you can go conspire.
But you can go conspire to murder somebody.
Yeah.
Totally okay.
And you know, be there to make judgments against someone who's doing those things. But like I think that's the nature of like being blind, which is like a consistent experience that Jesus heals blind people, but like the Pharisees are blind, right? And this actually plays out in the next section and becomes part of the sermon for this coming Sunday. Like the blindness of the Pharisees causes them in those moments where the gospel is actually being proclaimed, albeit a little bit hidden to some degree. Sure. Like they don't see the full picture. We got the full picture. The blindness of the Pharisees is to run right back to judgment and rule keeping, even after the gospel is proclaimed. Yeah. And that, if we're not careful, if the gospel isn't, if we're not open, if our eyes aren't open to see the gospel, like we can do the same thing.
Yes.
When grace is proclaimed, when mercy is proclaimed over people, if we're not in tune with the gospel, we will just go right back to law and judgment against those who are violating the law. Yeah. And that's sort of a scary indication of some Pharisaical tendencies that can show up in anybody's heart and mind.
And you're probably an exhausted person.
It is exhausting. Yeah. It just wears you out. And I've been there too.
Yeah,
I was definitely in the tribe of quick to place that judgment on people because of Pharisaical tendencies, because of rule-keeping tendencies.
And we like every Sunday I find myself like pockets of my heart where unrest is there, and needing to just quiet my own soul and hear the peace preached into my heart, because inevitably Monday through Saturday I've made some rule that somebody else isn't keeping that I am, whereby I can be justified and I feel better about myself. Or sometimes I fall short of my own standards, and I really have a hard time wrestling with my own self.
Yep.
And yeah.
Well, this is why we gather every week, right?
Yes.
And we call it a Sabbath because Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. He's risen on the first day of the week, and that's why we're gathering, to be reminded of that good news that the rest that we need for life really hinges on what Jesus has done for us, and that comes in the form of mercy and sacrifice, if you think about it.
If you
like
think about
Jesus' sacrifice.
Yeah.
So there we go. All right. Well, thanks for listening. Hopefully that was a helpful, refreshing reminder of what we looked at on Sunday. Good luck with your group tonight and or later this week. I don't know whenever you meet, or not.
Or if you stay home.
Or let me just say, hi, Mom. Thanks for listening. All right. Take care.
See you guys.